put families on notice that deep cuts are coming to their children's education.
The impact could be that we could have higher class sizes.
Calls for school boards to freeze their hiring, sending a shiver through some educators tonight. No decisions have been made yet, but many school trustees across Ontario believe the provincial government is sending a clear signal. Bad news is on the horizon for school budgets. Our Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley joining us live now. And Mike, you know what? They said they would be looking for efficiencies, and a lot of people said that was just a code for cuts.
Well, Dwight, look, there is a lot of uncertainty right now for parents and for teachers. It's this memo from the Ford government that has a lot of people in the school system talking right now, and many of them feel that what this does is set the stage for a big battle over education funding.
It's the time of year when kids are thinking of March break, and school boards start planning for next year. Typically, schools begin hiring now to replace teachers who will retire in June.
We normally would have information by now about what the numbers would look like and how much money we had to spend.
But the message from the Ford government is not so fast. This new memo from the Deputy Minister of Education tells school boards across Ontario to defer filling retirement vacancies and exercise prudence in making hiring decisions.
I'm so excited, I run all the way home from school.
This comes with schools already bracing for funding cuts. The government is talking about lifting the caps on class sizes in the primary years and changing full-day kindergarten.
Some decisions will have to be made, and some of them will be surprising to parents, I think, because many things that people think are given may not be a given at the end of this. We have to see.
The letter also points to the province's hiring freeze and says school boards may wish to freeze hiring too. What would the impact be?
I think it means fewer or larger class sizes. That means fewer teachers, which equals less for kids in terms of providing them with a good education.
We have a school system right now in Ontario that's already pretty stripped to the bone.
The NDP education critic says the Ford government needs to decide what its priorities are.
What's clear to me is that their priorities are not education, they are not children.
Education Minister Lisa Thompson was not available for an interview. In a statement, she says, quote, "We need to take a hard look at how school boards spend their money."
And all of this is really just a hint of the turmoil that could be in store for the school system. And that's because all of the contracts for the education unions expire this summer. And all of the signs suggest that once the school year begins next September, that there's going to be labor unrest. Dwight?
I think you're hitting the nail right on the head there. Thank you for that, Mike. And the fight over autism funding arrived on Doug Ford's doorstep today. Parents and autism advocates held a rally in front of the Premier's Etobicoke office. Changes announced by Minister Lisa MacLeod earlier are meant to clear off the wait lists of about 23,000 children over the next 18 months. The province says more children will get coverage, but there has been a huge backlash from families worried about how they'll afford therapy for their children.
I'm a single dad. My son has severe autism. I'm not going to be able to afford $60,000 a year in therapy for my son. I'm going to have to remortgage my house to even give my son even just a little bit of a hope.
What he's doing is just a nonsense, stupidest, toxic decision. It's going to ruin our children's life. And here are parents crying and standing in, doesn't have guts to come up and talk to us.
The province's new autism funding changes come into effect April 1st.
I think one of the important things we've realized is that if you remove Matt and his sexuality from the play and insert race or religion, it's the same story.
Their son, Matthew Shepard, was kidnapped, beaten, and left for dead nearly 20 years ago. This week, they're in the GTA for a school play about their son's life. My conversation with Judy and Dennis Shepard coming up a little later in the show.
All of that is about human.
We've had a bit of a break since our last big snowfall, and yet many Torontonians are still having a hard time maneuvering around the snowbanks, especially on side streets. Chris Glover joins us live now from Grange Place tonight. Chris, the city has a plan to tackle all that snow behind you.
This operation that's beginning tomorrow morning isn't so much for the main city streets. Those have mostly been handled. What this is going to be focusing on is the snowbanks that everybody's seeing on their side streets. And the city is becoming very concerned with these because they're worried that first responders might not be able to pass through.
With hefty snowbanks, it's difficult to drive down some side streets in a news van, let alone a delivery truck.
My days are longer. I'm doing 12-hour days instead of 8-hour days.
Because most of our deliveries are on the side streets, as you can see. So if we had to cancel 2 days this week after the storm because of the side street, we kept getting stuck.
In response, tomorrow the city is launching a snow removal operation.
Priority streets are those that have been deemed a safety risk for first responders.
I mean, here's a bus coming down the street right now, and there's snowbanks on both sides. So you got to maneuver into the side. I'm a bit of a cowboy, so I don't mind doing that. But if you're not, then it's, I guess it's precarious.
As this cowboy busts up the last of the ice on his front walk, he thinks the city is behind.
It's a bit late. But I guess, if there's some streets that are worse than this, I mean, it's fine now. But 2 days ago, I mean, there was probably a half a foot of snow at some parts.
The snow this winter has been relentless. January 28th's massive storm dumped about 30 centimeters of snow, more in one day than a typical full month of January. The average snowfall for February is 24 centimeters. This year, 43.7 centimeters.
Do you think that part of the problem is how much snow we've gotten this year?
No, this is Canada. We're used to snow.
In snow removal blitzes in past years, the city has used blowers, loaders, and dump trucks. This is the first time this year because there's so much snow and cold weather is in the forecast.
We can't rely on Mother Nature to sort of help us with this. It's not going away.
All that snow will be taken to one of 5 city facilities, basically vacant lots ready for heaps of snow. This winter, people have blasted social media with complaints of cars blocking streetcar lanes, parked in the wrong place because of all the snow. To make room for snow clearing equipment, be on the lookout for signs warning spots are temporarily off limits.
If you're parked in the wrong spot, the city may give you what it's calling a friendly tow. They'll move you to a nearby street at no cost to you.
While most Torontonians surveyed by Forum feel snow removal was the same this year as it's been in the past, more than a third thought it was worse.
Out of a 10, maybe a 6. I can't even lie, maybe a 6.
They should have jumped on it right away, but most of the side street, only one car can get down there.
They say we shouldn't have to wait for spring for clear streets.
And right now, so many side streets look exactly like this. A lot of vehicles parked in these big snowbanks. But as I mentioned in the piece there, you might not be able to keep your parking spot as the city crews need to come through to clear this stuff out of the way. So if you come out this weekend or over the course of the next 5 or 7 days while this blitz is going on and your vehicle's not there, the city says to please call police's non-emergency line to find out which of the neighboring side streets to find your vehicle on. And I just want to put a really fine point on that. Do not call 911. Call the non-emergency police line.
Thank you for clearing that up there. Now, the question a lot of people have, though, Chris, is how much is this going to cost?
It'll cost millions of dollars. That's according to Brad Ross at the City of Toronto. But he says that it's money that the city has. They've dedicated $85 million this year for snow removal. So far, they've only tapped into about $15 million of that. So they still have quite a bit to go around. And they think that this is a priority that needs to be addressed.
You got a scraper with you to help those folks out, to clean off their cars there, Chris? No?
I should, right?
Thank you, buddy. Colin, we're not going out there cleaning off anybody's car, but you heard what Chris said in the story. We can't wait for spring, and we really, we need it sooner than later. Yeah.
Yeah, sooner than later is right. And I couldn't believe friendly tow. I don't think I've ever heard that phrase before in my life. A friendly tow is possible. Yeah, here we are into March. Okay, we're getting closer to spring. It comes on the 20th. But wouldn't you like to know what the weather's normally like in March? And what's our weather going to be like? Well, we can start looking at what the averages are. So I'm taking our climate averages over a 30-year period, and I can tell you that in March, the daytime high is 4.6 degrees. What that means, of course, is at the beginning of the month, it's going to be a little cooler than at the end. So it's usually right about 1, almost 1 degree for the beginning, and by the time we get to the 31st, it's usually almost up to 8 degrees. So that averages out for the month at 4.6. We got to ask, snowfall, what do we normally see? Less than 20 centimeters. That's average. And then rainfall, of course, as we're getting closer and into spring, 32.6 millimeters would be typical. Let's come back to this number for a moment, shall we? Average high for today would be almost 1, I was mentioning, for the start of March. Well, this is my forecast of what we're going to see over the next 7 days. Not bad tomorrow, just a little below this line here, which is the average, which will be warming. Then, as we head towards Tuesday, nearly 10 degrees below seasonal. That's the daytime high I've got for you on Tuesday. Never mind the overnight low. We're going to get into that a little bit later in the show. So the trend to open this month is we're going to see some cold air move in after the weekend. Overnight tonight, then, enjoy a mild -6, although feeling like -11. We have some snowfall on the way tomorrow, light snow through the day, 2 to 4 centimeters. More details on that. And the temperature coming up close to seasonal, but it's not going to last, Dwight.
We like you, Colette, but we're not liking your forecasts.
I know, this is grammatically incorrect, but I feel like me no likey.
Thank you. We'll see you. Everybody at home is saying that.
Yeah, me no likey.
Canada has decided to formally start the extradition process against Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. She was arrested nearly 3 months ago in Vancouver. The Department of Justice says it has sufficient evidence to have the case put before an extradition judge. Meng's arrest has led to a frosting of relations between Canada and China. And today, China's foreign ministry seized the chance to question the state of judicial independence in Canada. It's pointing at Justin Trudeau's alleged meddling in the SNC-Lavalin affair. The Prime Minister has said his government could not intervene in Meng's case because Canada has an independent justice system. The Chinese embassy in Ottawa condemned the decision in a statement, saying this is not a merely judicial case, but a political persecution against a Chinese high-tech enterprise. The so-called rule of law and judicial independence asserted by Canada cannot cover up the mistakes made by the Canadian side on the case of Meng Wanzhou. The resignation of Jody Wilson-Raybould from Veterans Affairs last month triggered a mini shuffle to Cabinet today. Her Veterans Affairs job now goes to longtime MP Lawrence Macaulay. He leaves the role of Minister of Agriculture to Marie-Claude Bibeau. Her old job as Minister of International Development goes to Mariam Monsef, who also remains the Minister for Women and Gender Equality. Julie Van Duzen has been tracking all the changes for us from Ottawa. So tell us what these changes signal. Jude.
Well, I mean, it's a small game of musical chairs, but it's by a government, as usual these days, in reaction mode, reacting to Jody Wilson-Raybould and the fact that she quit cabinet last month, and so they had to fill her spot, and then they made a couple of changes. So the veterans job goes to Lawrence Macaulay from PEI, who is not exactly high profile in the whole NAFTA renegotiations. You didn't see him out there doing interviews all the time. However, he is a veteran of politics, that's for sure, 31 years, and the government seem to want to hand this portfolio, which has had a really rough ride lately, to someone who has a lot of experience. So that's the 5th minister they've had in 3.5 years. So that has really had a bumpy ride. And it's funny because Lawrence Macaulay was asked a similar question that Jody Wilson-Raybould was asked when she took over that portfolio. Is it a demotion? Take a listen.
To have the honor to represent the people who preserve peace and democracy for us worldwide, that's a long piece from a demotion. It's truly an honor.
If you look at the record of Lawrence Macaulay as agricultural minister, when he ought to have been the champion for dairy farmers, he oversaw them losing tons of market share. This guy doesn't know how to fight for the people that he's supposed to fight for.
Strong words there.
Rough.
Even with the shuffle, though, the SNC-Lavalin affair, it's not going away. It seems like the political pressure is still there. What are they saying about that?
Well, they were probably asked as many questions about SNC-Lavalin as they were about their new jobs. Jody Wilson-Raybould, will she be staying in caucus or will you be kicking her out? They kind of tiptoed around that. But they were also asked about SNC-Lavalin. Will it get, a deferred prosecution? Yeah, deferred prosecution, i.e., will it be able to avoid a criminal trial. So take a listen to Marie-Claude Bibeau.
I think we have the responsibility to look in our toolkits to see how we can always do better and for creating jobs and protecting jobs, always within our legal and budget framework.
So it's just one of the many questions they continue to be dogged about. I mean, they go about trying to govern every day, but they seem to get derailed on SNC Lavalin all the time, and it will continue, of course, next week because we know Gerald Butts, the former PMO advisor to the Prime Minister, is supposed to testify at the Justice Committee. So keeping the issue very much alive.
Oh yeah, it seems like this inter-scene battle, and they have only themselves to blame, but it's fun watching it, and thank you for keeping us
Sound like you're
up.
talking to your kids. You only have yourself to blame. But it's
so true. Thank
so
you,
true.
Julie.
Okay.
Canadians with a criminal record for simple possession of marijuana are about to get a break. Ottawa says it will introduce legislation to streamline applications for a pardon.
Individuals who have been previously convicted only for simple possession of cannabis should be allowed to participate in a fulsome way in their communities.
Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale said unlike other pardons, there will be no waiting period and no fee. Goodale said a criminal record can have an impact on careers and housing and even make it hard to volunteer. He says that's unfair since Canada legalized cannabis last October. About 500,000 Canadians have a record for pot possession. Goodale hopes to get the legislation passed before the summer recess in late June. As the weight lifts on those convictions, police have come down on this illegal dispensary in Kensington Market following a major drug bust at a warehouse at Keelan Steels. Since early February, York police said they had been trailing a suspected drug dealer from Vaughan. Yesterday, they followed the suspect to an industrial warehouse. Take a listen to what they say they found.
Lo and behold, they found a significant cannabis distribution and packaging facility where inside was a lot of bulk cannabis, pre-rolled joints, edibles, and a variety of other products designed to be resold.
The 42-year-old has been arrested and charged with possession and distribution of cannabis. Police say this is the first time they've seen such a large quantity of edibles. It's still unclear if the warehouse was supplying other illegal pot shops as well. And a second arrest has been made in connection to a break-and-enter at a Scarborough youth shelter. It happened on Sunday at the Youth Link Transition Home and Shelter. Dozens of computers were taken along with microwaves and 2 big-screen TVs. Police arrested a 20-year-old Brampton man on Monday. Yesterday, they arrested a 21-year-old man also from Brampton. The shelter is being renovated and is scheduled to open on March 15th. It will be the only emergency youth shelter in Scarborough. And the traffic stop in Oshawa turned into a high-speed chase last night.
Air 1, I have this, guys. If you guys want to back off, I've got this.
The police helicopter picked up the pursuit. Officers had first tried to stop the driver after he was spotted swerving in and out of his lane. This happened just after midnight. Police tracked the car to the 401 all the way from Oshawa to Scarborough.
They're bailing. Driver's bailing out here. I'm staying with the driver.
You can see the driver running through the neighborhood, hopping fences and trying to hide on a porch. Eventually, officers on the ground closed in and one was able to tackle him. The 24-year-old driver is charged with cocaine possession with the intention of trafficking, fleeing police, and several other charges. He had passengers in the car, but they were released. Do you know what is in your baby's food? Coming up, the toxin a CBC Marketplace investigation found in infant cereals and snacks.
The weather update is brought to you by Train Extreme Conditions Testing. It's hard to stop a train, really hard. Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
I'm Talia Ricci, and coming up, we're going to take you on a trip through time. A new exhibit at the Toronto Reference Library looks at how the hip-hop scene in the city has evolved and the way it's influenced music around the world.
It took 91 days and 4 hours, but a father-daughter team from Burlington finally made it to land after rowing across the Atlantic Ocean. John Beeden and his 20-year-old daughter Libby left the shore in Portugal at the end of November. John has rowed the oceans before. He was the first person to row solo nonstop from North America to Australia. This was Libby's first big row, however. They took turns at the oars, rowing around the clock and taking naps in the boat's tiny cabin. They had a scare when a wave nearly capsized their boat 2 weeks in, but this morning, 6,000 kilometers later, the two reached Antigua. The Beedens spoke to CBC today saying they're looking forward to a hot shower and some fresh fruit. What's your baby munching on? This week, in a joint investigation, Marketplace and Radio-Canada test infant cereals and snacks to see what else is lurking in the mix. What they uncover in some of the samples is higher levels of one particular toxin a certain popular grain may be the source of. Magda Gabriel-Selassie explains.
These babies have worked up quite the appetite. As for what they're eating, there's a list of options.
Rice cereal first at 5 months.
He likes his snacks, so puffs.
Turns out there's something else in the mix, arsenic. It can be a naturally occurring toxin or come from industrial and agricultural runoff. The most toxic kind is called inorganic arsenic. Rice absorbs more arsenic than other grains, and it's a popular grain in baby food. So what does that mean for your baby? We test 7 kinds of infant cereal and 7 snacks several times to find out. Our tests show the ones made with rice products had higher levels of arsenic. On average, Baby Gourmet Creamy Brown Rice and PC Organic Puffs had the highest. Researchers have said that arsenic can affect a child's growth and development. Europe set a legal limit for inorganic arsenic in baby food of 100 parts per billion. Our test shows, on average, Baby Gourmet Creamy Brown Rice has 125 parts per billion, and PC Organic Puffs 170. What does one of the world's leading arsenic experts think of that?
I do not recommend giving children food products with such high levels of arsenic in them.
Maharg says these products would be illegal in Europe, but they're sold here in Canada, where there are no set limits for arsenic in rice products. Health Canada now says it's looking into that, and testing these 2 products will be part of the process.
We can do a variety of different things, all the way up to taking it off the market.
As for the other products we tested, they all fell below the EU limit. We shared our results with both Baby Gourmet and PC Organics. They provided statements. Baby Gourmet said its team is currently reviewing the new information provided to us by CBC Marketplace, as the standards used in some countries around the world differ from the Canadian guidelines we follow. Meanwhile, PC Organics, which is owned by Loblaws, assures its customers that its products are safe, but it's also committing to reducing the arsenic.
We are working with our suppliers to minimize these trace levels and will use European standards as our guide. Magda Gabriel-Selassie, CBC News, Toronto.
For more test results and how to reduce arsenic from all the rice we eat, watch The Truth About Rice tonight on Marketplace at 8 p.m. right here on CBC Television, or stream anytime with the CBC Gem. When her father died, she did what she could to honor his final wishes, part of which was to be cremated. But she says she was told her father may not be eligible for cremation. After the break, why not? And her warning for others.
So if you're sitting down with a client and you're taking their money, I think it's incumbent upon you to have the correct information, and I think there should be a law where those funeral directors actually have to get someone to sign something that says that they've been informed.
Al Monk wanted to be cremated when he died, and long before his death, he arranged to have that happen. But when he passed last month, his family was told the cremation might not be able to happen. As Greg Ross explains, it left his family scrambling at a very difficult time.
Funeral arrangements were the last thing Cindy Monk Fuller thought she would have to worry about when her dad died last month, because they had already been taken care of years earlier by her father.
He was the type of person who never wanted to leave, particularly his wife Helen, with any kind of stress.
In 2012, Al Monk, who was in his early 80s, went to the Highland Funeral Home in Scarborough to sign a prepaid funeral plan agreement. It cost him around $2,200, and his daughter says he was adamant that he be cremated.
So it was important for you to make sure that you carried through with his wishes?
Absolutely. Not only was he my father, but I would carry through with someone's wishes no matter who they were.
Just hours after Al passed, Monk Fuller and her stepmother were at the funeral home finalizing his plans when someone there asked about his medical history.
She said at one point, has your husband ever had any kind of treatment? They call it brachia treatment.
Al had been treated for prostate cancer years earlier, but his wife couldn't recall if doctors performed brachytherapy. It involves implanting dozens of tiny devices called theracedes, which make it possible to target affected areas with higher doses of radiation. But it can also disqualify a person from cremation.
Any body that contains an implant, such as a pacemaker or the theracedes, which are very small seeds, radioactive seeds that are implanted into the tumor or near the tumor. Any implants in a body would prevent that body from being cremated.
It's mandated in the Funeral, Burial and Cremation Services Act of Ontario to protect cremation operators from being exposed to radiation.
Every crematorium in Toronto was refusing to cremate my father.
This just added stress to an already difficult time for the family. Monk Fuller says she was already frustrated at the funeral home for not making this clear years earlier. There was nothing about implants mentioned in the contract Al signed.
If you're sitting down with a client and you're taking their money, I think it's incumbent upon you to have the correct information.
We reached out to the funeral home, and a representative told us asking that kind of question or having that within our agreement is not part of our scope. Our role is to really provide families with guidance in creating funeral and memorializations that are meaningful to them and their loved ones. Monk Fuller had to get in touch with Al's doctor to find out what treatment he had.
The MD was nice enough to look up all the records and called us back and said no, Al had only had straight radiation treatment.
In the end, they were able to follow through with Al's wishes. The family is hoping that by telling their story, they may help prevent another family from going through the same issue in the future. Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
And remember, if you have a story you would like us to look into, send us an email, torontotips@cbc.ca. We're getting a better idea of what a smart city by the waterfront could look like. Google's sister company, Sidewalk Labs, is showing off some of their ideas at an open house this weekend. And as Linda Ward reports, the innovation space on Lakeshore Boulevard is dressed to impress.
So show us what you got here. What are we looking at? This is something to see.
Yeah, so what you're looking at is a work in progress of something we're calling a building raincoat. And this is the idea that we could expand the space from the building out into the street to have more of an indoor-outdoor space that allows for sidewalk cafes, farmers markets, lots of different activities to happen in times of the year when you normally aren't outside.
So we've got some fancy lighted sidewalks here.
So what you're looking at here are these modular pavers. Each one of them can be independently removed, makes it easier to maintain, faster and simpler to fix potholes, for example. And then we're testing incorporating different technologies into these pavers. So for example, lighting, there's some heating, and then also looking at how the pavers can be better for managing storms and flood risk. And so what we can look at here is sort of a paver that is porous, and that means that it can absorb water as opposed to just having the water run off into the stormwater system. So let's pretend that this is rain coming down from the sky. You can see that that water just goes right into the paver, absorbing into it itself and going down into the soil below.
That's amazing, and that's concrete?
And so this is made of concrete. It's a slightly different mix. It's a much lighter mix, and that's what allows it to absorb that water into it.
Not everyone has been a fan of the whole project, right? And I guess I'm wondering what you hope this open house might tell those people.
What I hope is clear when people come down and they meet us and they see the work that we're doing is just really understanding the intent of this project. We've been here for a long time now, listening to Torontonians, really understanding the challenges and sort of opportunities that people see in this great city and how we're working to really improve this place, make it a better city, improve people's lives. And so when you come down and you see the types of work we're doing and are able to kind of provide feedback on that, really hope that people understand that.
Just what is your mayor doing there? We'll explain after weather. Oh, Michael's there too. Colette, your mayor is singing reggae, which means he wants a warm-up.
Yeah, there you go. And we're going to give him a warm-up at some point anyway. We know it's coming. I know you think I'm full of bad news with all these cold temperatures that are in our long-range forecast, but I'll give you a piece of good news. Today, 1st of March, first day of meteorological spring, okay? So for us meteorologists, this is when our spring starts. So happy spring. And for everyone else, hey, we've got the spring equinox coming up on the 20th. So it does fall within this month. So there are good things coming. Current temperatures, there's some good things there, at least in the next day or two. It's after that that the temperature really falls off. So it's -3 right now. It feels like -7. At least the winds aren't too strong, so not too significant of a wind chill factor that we're seeing. Clouds on the increase after some nice sunshine today. So we're seeing it becoming overcast through the overnight hours. And then we've got this system. It is a weak system, but still coming through with some light snow tomorrow, starting in the morning, maybe some flurries first, and then getting into some snow, and then into the later afternoon hours, it should be moving out. So what we'll see, 2, 3, 4 centimeters from this. A few pockets could get up to 5. This one is a much lighter one, and it's going to move through fairly quickly. But we are dodging a bullet this weekend in terms of this major storm to the south of us. The track does seem to stay stateside, and so I'm just putting some flurries into our forecast for Sunday, mix of sun and cloud, and then some flurries into the afternoon and evening, and I really hope that track doesn't change. That's how it looks. Overnight tonight, it is going to feel like about -11, so you'll find that even if you're up early tomorrow morning on Saturday. Highs tomorrow, close to seasonal values, 0, -1 for Markham, 1 degree for St. Catharines with that light snow, but again, not too significant in terms of the accumulations. We do have to look at the numbers, though, as we go past the weekend. So after Sunday at -3, that's when we get into this significantly colder air coming in as we're getting deeper into March. -6, -9, -8, and these overnight lows very chilly, and wind chills feeling like we're in the -25 to -30 range. So we'll probably see some extreme cold weather alerts coming back to us into next week. But on a positive note, Dwight, by the end of the month, the average high is almost 8 degrees by the end of this month, okay?
See, that's more like reggae weather. That stuff behind you,
there
not
you go.
reggae weather. Thank you, Colin.
No, nobody's singing about this.
The mayor lending his voice today in recognition of the city's reggae scene. John Tory joined by a number of Toronto's reggae pioneers at City Hall. The city is officially proclaiming tomorrow Titans of Reggae Day.
These foundational artists, along with others, built an incredible artists colony right here in Toronto that was heard around the world. And they're still being heard around the world. The world renowned...
Michael bought that jacket on Eglinton and Allen. I know he did. Titans of Reggae Day will culminate with a show tomorrow night at the Opera House. An exhibit at the Toronto Reference Library on now looks at the evolution of the city's hip-hop scene. The exhibit is a collaboration with Northside Hip Hop Archives. Talia Ritchie tells us what it is all about.
For the record, what we're seeing all throughout here is an attempt really to look at the origins of hip-hop culture in Toronto by spending time with some of the original sound systems, some of the original DJs. We track some of the early records, some of the early vinyls, which you'll see in some of these cases, and we track the progress of Toronto as a hip-hop scene and its growth.
And I think this is probably a pretty big name for most people.
Everybody knows Maestro Fresh West, and this album actually is, nah, this kid can't be from Canada.
This jam is amplified, so just glide and let your backbone slide.
Well, the first thing you'll see when you come to For the Record is we have this huge map that is from 1965 Toronto, and it's been bombed, so graffiti's been put on it by one of the city's most illustrious graffiti artists, Elixir. And what we ask people to do is literally map for us places where you heard these sound systems play and where these DJs played. We have these listening stations, and these are college radio shows. And these radio shows were the main outlet for music in the 90s.
Do you think people would be surprised to learn how this music was accessed in the 80s and 90s compared to how people consume music today?
I think people would definitely be surprised on how you would experience hip-hop because it wasn't on the radio and because it wasn't on television. You had to go to an event. You had to go to a party. So the DJs and the sound systems were your main access point to experiencing this new thing called hip-hop.
The sound system started setting the trend in the downtown clubs from the Twilight Zone, what was known for such a nice sound system. People from all walk of life will come to Toronto and play. The Government. All of these places are now cultivating in the sound of the sound system from the 80s and the 90s.
Why are you excited to share this exhibit with people?
It's really about this present moment and how a city like Toronto could cultivate the Drakes, how a city of Toronto could cultivate the Boy Wonders, how we could cultivate these superstars on a stage globally where they're successful because we've had this community that has nourished these talents.
Kidnapped, tied to a fence, beaten, and left for dead. More than 20 years ago, Matthew Shepard became the symbol for the fight against violence targeting the LGBTQ community. Now his parents have traveled here from the U.S. to see a school play about their son's life. Why his tragic story continues to inspire. Next.
What we lost in losing Matt, they're realizing they're losing the same thing no matter what country they're in. Every time somebody in a marginalized community perishes due to hate. And that's something that you never get back.
This weather update is brought to you by Fairmont Le Chateau Frontenac, the best location for your next spring break getaway in Quebec City.
20 years ago, Matthew Shepard was brutally beaten, tied to a fence, and left for dead in Laramie, Wyoming. The 21-year-old was targeted because he was gay. Matthew's death captured international headlines and put a spotlight on hate crimes in the U.S. His story inspired films, novels, songs, and a play called The Laramie Project. That play is now being staged at the Country Day School in King City, and Matthew's parents have traveled from Wyoming to watch it. I met with Judy and Dennis Shepard to talk about the play, their son, and his legacy.
These are people trying to distance themselves from this crime. And we need to own this crime, I feel.
Well, it's wonderful every time the play is performed. Keep Matt's story, well, I don't know, the cautionary tale of Matt's story to be told everywhere in different aspects, different parts of the world. It's always wonderful, and it's great to meet the cast because they're always so filled with passion and concern. It's wonderful.
And it's a chance to educate the audience.
And I think one of the important things we've realized is that if you remove Matt and his sexuality from the play and insert race or religion, it's the same story.
20 years, 2 decades after this terrible tragedy, that this story would still be so compelling and still be being told and making a difference.
Oh gosh, no, we thought a couple years at the most. People tend to move on from one tragedy to the next. Lord knows we've had plenty of those happening in the last 20 years, but Matt's story just seems to resonate and hang on. In the a couple years after Matt was killed, I was reading an editorial about the way women were treated in Afghanistan, and Matt's name was in the article. It's like, well, okay, I guess that brings to mind what hate and discrimination, hate crimes really do. But it was not at all to do about sexuality or even Matt.
Why do you think it is still so relevant?
Well, everybody can see him and get a part out of him that relates to them, male or female. He was short. He spoke 5 languages. He grew up in the middle of Wyoming, you know, hunting and fishing, camping. Country boy who went to high school in Lugano, Switzerland, on the Italian border. He loved theater and politics. He liked, everybody was his friend. Yeah. So everybody could, and they still can, they can still relate to some part of him.
Matthew was the type of person that if this had happened to another person, would have been the first on the scene to offer his help, his hope, and his heart to the family.
As part of Matt's story, I read where the sheriff said, you know what, I was homophobic before I started working on this case. Yeah. And meeting people and talking to Matt's friends and talking to other people in the community, he said it changed him. Yeah. It changed his views.
It did change his heart. He's become one of the biggest supporters of the LGBTQ community in Laramie. They realized all the fear and terror that the LGBT community was facing, especially after losing Matt. Yes. And they became so involved that they gave out, which is something you don't do, they gave out their personal phone numbers in case anybody in the LGBTQ community had a problem. Wow. Call me personally, and I will be there for you.
Well, if the community doesn't have confidence in the law enforcement helping them and protecting them, taking care of them, then hate crimes go unreported because they fear they're going to be re-victimized or not believed. And we need to know where these are happening so we can address the issue.
Do you get any comfort in knowing that Matt's death has made a difference for the rights of people?
Probably about the only comfort we do get is knowing how much Matt's story has raised awareness about what the community was facing.
And what we lost in losing Matt, they're realizing they're losing the same thing no matter what country they're in every time somebody in a marginalized community perishes due to hate. And that's something that you never get back. What their potential was and what they were actually doing is lost forever, just because they happen to be different. Well, we're all different.
So important. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Dwight.
Thank you for sharing your son with the world.
Thanks.
what has happened in a real snake compound. We passed the 50-second mark.
This year marks half a century since Neil Armstrong took those first small steps on the surface of the moon. A new documentary opening this week transports viewers to that extraordinary moment, and space fans can take in the astronomical milestone on the IMAX screen. Eli Glasner is here with his review, and Eli, no shortage of space race films, so what makes this one different?
Access and the approach. So the director's a guy named Todd Douglas Miller. He didn't want to make another documentary with talking heads. No astronaut saying, I remember when I did the thing. No, he really wants us to experience it. So it's linear. It starts with that takeoff and then ends with the splashdown in the ocean. But how are you going to do that? So he's getting ready to make the doc, and then he gets an email from an archivist from NASA, very excited, saying, you won't believe what we found. What they found was actually Panasonic 65mm film. This is the same stuff they used to make, oh, I don't know, Cleopatra and Ben-Hur and Lawrence of Arabia. So you have these beautiful, crystal clear images of everything. I mean, the rocket itself, mission control, and of course, Neil Armstrong getting ready to be the first man to step on the moon. And so here's a moment, a reporter asks him, imagine, how does it feel to represent all of Earth? How do you answer that? Take a look at Neil.
That's relatively difficult to answer. It's a job that we collectively said that was possible and we could do, and of course the nation itself is backing us, so we just sincerely hope that we measure up to that.
Can you imagine a more self-effacing answer? I mean, that's just what we do. We're going to do the job. And, you know, there he is getting suited up. And that's the thing. This is not about the inner life of these astronauts. This is not the movie First Man, because very much it is about everybody else. But the women, and mostly men, in that control room. It's about the tourists outside staring up at the sky waiting. It's about the reporters lining up at the payphone terminals to call back with their copy for tonight's edition. And even the engineers, we see them tightening a bolt on a leaky fuel valve the morning of the liftoff. So you see them, you know, and then how do you explain that? Well, we have the narrators, basically Walter Cronkite, and these public affairs officers who were in mission control, and they would just explain to the public, well, we have a leaky valve, but it seems to be okay, so we're proceeding, and that's how the movie progresses.
There's some footage here, though, that we haven't seen before. Why haven't we seen it before?
So MGM was going to make like a space documentary for the big screen, kind of IMAX before it was IMAX, and then they decided to cancel that, but luckily we found the footage that they shot as kind of a promotional thing for NASA, but it's not just the visuals, it's the audio. So in Mission Control, there were 30-track tape recorders, so not 8-track, 30 tracks, recording everything all those gentlemen said. Well, what do you do? What does it sound like? Let me play you an example.
Okay, our flight controllers, go to... No, I don't know. Welcome, go. GNC, go. Econ, go. Surgeon, go. Captain Onward, go for landing.
So you have this audio spaghetti, all those voices, but then there's a guy in Toronto named Ben Feist. He is actually the brother of Leslie Feist.
I was going to ask you if he was Feist, okay.
Brother of Leslie Feist. There's Ben. Ben's not a musician. He's a software engineer. He wrote code to untangle all that audio, 30 separate tracks, so we could actually figure out, okay, at 5 p.m. on Thursday, the surgeon said this, and the flight commander said, go for flight over there, and then we find the visual, and suddenly you can see and hear these voices that we've heard for decades. And what struck me is you see the men in this room, and it's mostly men, and they're so young. Like the average age was mid-20s. They look like Sears catalog models. They got their turtlenecks, they're smoking their pipes, the brush cuts, and they're just sitting there at the terminals doing their job.
You're obviously a fan of this film. Favorite moment in it?
I want to try and convey the intensity, but also the simplicity. I mean, the way the director shows us at times is almost experimental. So there's a single moment where they're getting ready for the moon landing, and all we see on the screen is basically a little bit of gray. And that lunar lander is getting closer and closer, and the numbers are counting down, and they're almost to zero, and then there's an alarm. And so you hear Mission Control in real time trying to think, what is that alarm? What do we do? You can't exactly stop and go back at that point. They're problem solving in real time. But beyond just that, it's, I don't know, this is a snapshot of a time when America was on a mission bigger than itself. I mean, the idea of these thousands of people coming together for this just a few weeks before Woodstock. As the war in Vietnam continues, I would say it was unbelievable if it wasn't so convincing. So, 5 out of 5.
5 out of 5.
Remarkable.
That's special. I will have to see this one. Thank you, Eli.
You're welcome.
Happy meteorologist spring. We'll wait
Thank
for
you.
hours.
No, I'm happy to share it. I just wish I could share some better
Man,
weather.
the temperatures are moving in the wrong direction for this time of year.
Yeah, I don't like it. None of, well, okay, maybe there's somebody who
The
does.
skiers
but-
love it. It's been a nice ski season.
Yeah, and speaking of skiers, we're getting a little dusting of snow coming through for us into Saturday. Overnight tonight, those clouds thickening up, -6 for the low. And then tomorrow coming up to seasonal high around 0. We should be just a tiny bit warmer than that. And looking at 2 to 4, maybe in some cases 5 centimeters of snow through the day Saturday. And then that moves out Saturday night. And Sunday, this next stronger system staying south of us.
And it's just going to get colder and colder.
Yes, I'm sorry.
All right. Have a great, have a great
Meteorological
weekend,
spring.
everybody. Cullen and I will see you back here Monday. Mike Wise has you covered tonight.